everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Today we have a new mysterious case. We are going to talk about Jacob Wetterling, which is a case I found incredible. Obviously, it's sad how everything happened, and one definitely can see the incompetence of the authorities and judicial systems right here. But anyway, before I start, don't forget to follow me on all my social media. You know I have a billion social media accounts. Follow me on Twitch, where we do streamings, we talk, and we have fun. Subscribe to this channel and activate the notification bell so it lets you know when I upload a video. And well, without anything else to say, let's begin. The case of Jacob Wetterling. Jacob Erwin Wetterling was born on February 17, 1978 in St. Joseph, Minnesota. Let's say that regarding his life there isn't much information, but some things are known. His parents were Patty and Jerry, and he had 3 other siblings called Carmen, Amy, and Trevor. They lived in St. Joseph, which was a place that didn't have much population. There were about 5,000 people, and they lived towards the outskirts of the town. That is very important. Well, you realize later in the case, but they basically live towards the outskirts of the town in a more rural area, where the houses are farther apart. Let's say that the neighbors are not right next to them, but several hectares apart. And let's say that the streets weren't paved and, well, had certain different things from the ones in the city. He was in 6th grade when all this happened. He was 11 years old and was a boy that really liked sports. He especially liked football, basketball, and he also liked hockey. You could see he was a supremely adorable and tender kid. Everyone who met him said so. And he had the normal personality for an 11-year-old, and also he was precious and tender kid, truly. What happened on the days of the event? In the morning, he went fishing with his father. He told him to go, and he loved that plan, so he spent the morning with his father fishing. Fishing is a sport that requires a lot of patience and time being still, so it was like a father-son bonding time. After that, they came back to watch football, for they also loved that plan, and at the end of the day, they were skating, or well, skateboarding. Around 5:30, his parents decided to go because they had a dinner with some of their friends, so they left their kids at home. The only sister that didn't stay at home was the oldest. As she was the oldest, she was able to go visit a friend and sleep at her place because they didn't have school the next day. Meanwhile, the other 3 siblings plus Aaron, who was one of Jacob's best friends, stayed to sleep with them and spend the night there. They got together that night, ate pizza, play, and well, have a really good time. Until it came a time in the night in which Jacob called his parents and asked permission to go with his brother and Aaron to rent a movie. Well, you know that was something really normal for that time, so they wanted to go rent a movie to watch that night. They called the parents and the mother was the first one to pick up. The mother told them, "No, it's too late, I don't want you to go, but ask your father." Let's say that the typical situation of, well, ask your father, and if he says yes, then go. So they ask the father, and this time the father say yes, but take flashlights and reflective vest with you, where they were going cycling. The place was about 15 minutes away, following straight the same street they lived on. So they say like, yes, obviously we'll take care of each other, and they went out to rent the movie. Obviously now look at the impact it had that the father said yes to that decision, and I'll explain why. They went to rent the movie, and when they were coming back, it was darker, obviously. It was later, so they started going back quickly. However, some streets before arriving to the Wetterling's house, a man approaches the 3 boys. They remember he had dark clothes, black, and that he wore a mask like a ski mask, which was also like black. In that moment, he told the boys to come down from their bikes, obviously pointing at them with a gun, and told them to lay on the ground. Obviously, they supremely scared did what he said because they didn't want to get hurt. At some point, they even thought that it was a prank. A friend from the neighborhood was playing on them, but then they realized that was not the case. The man started asking them their ages, starting by Trevor, the youngest brother. He said he was 10, and the men say, "Get up right now, run towards the wood, and don't look back. If you look back, I'll shoot you." Obviously, Trevor runs away, fearing for his life, and then the exact same thing happens with Aaron. Aaron says like, "Well, I'm 11. The man says, "Get up, run, and don't look back or I'll shoot you." Obviously, as he was somewhat bigger than Trevor, runs faster, reaches Trevor, and then when they are at a safe distance, both of them look back. They say that they saw how a man took Jacob by the elbow, put him into a cart, and left. They ran as they never ran in their lives towards the house, this time the neighbors, and they told him like, "Someone took Jacob, someone took Jacob." In that moment, this man obviously calls Jacob's parents and tells them like, "It's better if you come here because it seemed that something happened to Jacob. Someone apparently took him." While they arrive, the man calls 911.
Yes, this is Merlin Scherzak calling from in St. Joe, out in the township. I'm right now next door to my neighbors, the Jerry Wetterling family.
That's where you're coming
And some of their boys went down to Tom Thumb's to pick up a movie, and on their way back, someone stopped them, and we believe that they have one of the boys because one of the boys did not come back with them.
Okay, what was Jacob last seen wearing?
He was wearing a red hockey jacket that had police department on.
Obviously, the parents arrive, the police arrives, and the boys tell them the story. They went back to the place where they said everything happened, and they indeed found the bikes on the ground. And it was complicated because let's say that the police and some people didn't want to believe in the boys. They thought that the boys had been probably playing with a gun, that they had accidentally shot Jacob, and now were trying to cover their tracks. However, they stuck to the story. They said this is for real, and let's say that then the investigation about Jacob's whereabouts began. Here's when an important person called Joy Baker appears. She's a journalist that many years after this case starts, decides to start creating a reportage and an investigation regarding the case. What happened during all the time? Years and years passed by in which some investigations were conducted, but Jacob didn't come home. They didn't find a trace of him either. She starts her own investigation because she remembers that case a lot. She remembers seeing many posters about his disappearance. She starts doing a recollection of everything that had happened, but I'll come back to her story later. So the police investigation about Jacob begins. There were a lot of reports and tips about his disappearance. It is said that there were around 70,000 leads that the police had to follow to try find Jacob somewhere. And so the search expanded as well. They were able to find some tire tracks near the place that he was taken away from, and also some shoe prints. Obviously, some national TV broadcasts were made. He appeared on the news from every state in case someone had seen him. They offered $100,000 to anyone who found him. It's important to mention this because it's the first case, one of the first cases in the US, to be the most mediatic in history, one of the most renowned because of the amount of people involved in this investigation. The year of 2004 arrived. Many years had passed since the boy's disappearance, and the story of a kidnapping that had happened 9 months before Jacob's came to light. It was the kidnapping of a boy called Jared Shirel, a boy that was 12 years old when the kidnapping happened. He said that he was walking home from a local cafe in Cold Spring, Minnesota. It was a place that was really close to where Jacob originally lived. He said that a man approached him with a car. The man was inside to ask him some directions. But at some point when he was giving him directions, the man came down quickly, grabbed him by the shoulders, and put him in his car. He said he was taken to a remote area. He didn't know where he was, and he was obviously abused by this man. But at some point he told him like, well, put your clothes on, we're leaving. He put him in the car again, they drove for a long time, and he took him to a city. He told him if he recognized the city, and he said he didn't. The man said, well, get out. The man left him alive and ordered him to get out of the car. Jacob managed to go back home alive, and well, after many years he tells his story, and let's say that he eventually becomes important in Jacob's case. It's a very similar case to his. He went through something very similar with a man giving him orders, a man who was even physically similar. But one way or the other, sadly, they didn't give the same importance in Jacob's case. I mean, they didn't think it could be something similar or even related. They also did some investigation and discovered that the tires and the footprints they found didn't belong to the person that probably kidnapped Jacob. And what happened? In that moment, some teens were driving near the place where everything happened. There are some things that I didn't know existed in the USA, which are called police scanners. And those are basically things that people can use to listen to the police radio frequencies, so to speak. These teens were very close to the day of Jacob kidnapping, and they used the police scanner and started to listen to the police officer conversations about Jacob's search. They decided to get involved, so they went to the place of the events, they drove through the nearby streets, and their cars and shoes matched the tracks and the prints that the police found. This was something that discarded them from being suspects in the kidnapping, for the tracks weren't from the kidnapper but from the skids who unknowingly got involved in the investigation. And so the investigation begins against a first suspect, a man called Danny Heinrich. He lived in Painesville, which was a place 30 miles away from St. Joseph's where Jacob lived. He starts being a suspect specifically for the similarity he starts having with the compound sketches from the police. And the police also has a slight suspicion about his behavior. However, he was very helpful with the police. He gave them his shoes, he handed strips of his hair so they could be able to examine and prove if he was guilty or not. However, the tire tracks didn't match the ones they found, and the shoe prints didn't match either. On the other hand, they started getting Jared involved, the other boy who was kidnapped 9 months before, with Heinrich, and they put him inside of Heinrich's car to see if that was the car he used to abduct him so long ago. He said that the car was really similar, like 8 to 10, but he didn't remember much, although he said it might be the car. This obviously made Heinrich match the description, and let's say that he remained being the main suspect. However, at the same time appears another suspect called Dan Ressier. He was a close neighbor of the Wetterlings and he is investigated. His property is investigated because when everything happened, he immediately got involved in the investigation. He went with the police to look for Jacob and he was very involved in that, so many people started suspecting him. The police even got a search warrant for his house to see if he was the person that had kidnapped Jacob. They even excavated his yard with a machinery and everything to see if he was actually guilty. Dan constantly tells that the police treated him horribly, that he constantly was forced to confess the crime, but he pleaded that he was innocent all the time. They didn't find any evidence that proved he was involved, and that was a big problem because later he sued the police for not having evidence of him being the culprit. And then is when Joy Baker, the journalist I was telling you about, gets involved along Jared, the other boy that was kidnapped, into a deeper investigation. They say that the police never paid attention to some kidnappings that had happened in Painesville, the town where Heinrich lived. And no one ever paid attention to those cases because there were cases that were eerily similar to the others. Everyone talked about a very similar man, a man wearing a very similar clothes, with very similar voice, a rough one, and he also used very similar threats, telling them he would shoot them if they look, if they turn around, and other things. That was when the police, after not finding anything on Dan, went back to thinking of Heinrich as the suspect. How did the investigation continue? They processed this man's DNA against some DNA remains they found on the jacket that Jared was wearing the date he was abused. They managed to find a link with this man's DNA, so they decided to get a search warrant to examine his house. They found an incredible amount of explicit videos of kids. You know, I can't say the word or I'll get banned, but they found many explicit videos of kids, photographs, and a bunch of texts and things related to that. Obviously, he's arrested for that crime, for having under his possession those kind of files, and that's when this man's judicial process starts. And here's when I say that anywhere, without a doubt, the justice fails a lot. He managed to get a deal with his attorney and the prosecutor and, well, the people involved in this case, stating that if he confessed to his crimes, especially Jacob's crime, they would guarantee he wouldn't be judged for the crime against Jacob, but only the crime of having files of these children. I don't know how that works, but the excuse from the prosecution and the judges was that if they didn't accept the deal, he wouldn't say anything about what happened to Jacob. They made the deal and Heinrich confessed before the judge. And here's when the painful part of this story begins, because he confesses that he committed the crime against Jacob. And how's the confession? It was October 22, 1989. He says he left his house in his car to look out for victims. He saw 3 kids heading towards the movie rental place and he parked it in that place. As I've told you, Jacob lived in the outskirts of town, so he parked near an open field and hid himself into one of those pieces of land. There he waited for the kids. When the kids went back, the kids' stories match his, so he gets out of the car, threatens them with a gun, tells them, "Get on the ground, tell me how old you are," and finally he chooses Jacob. He says that in that moment he grabbed him, he put him in the car, cuffed him, and they started driving very fast towards his home, which was in Painesville, somewhere else. He told him to keep low while he drove, and he remembers that Jacob just cried and said, "Why did I do wrong?" And in that moment he said he drove to a gravel well, which was in Painesville. And there's when he forced Jacob out of the car. He uncuffed him, so to speak. He took his coat off and forced him to undress. You obviously know what happened. He hurt him in many ways, and 20 minutes after that, he told him well, put your clothes on. He had been the same perpetrator that attacked Jared 9 months before. He told him the exact same thing. He thought, well, I've already abused him, so let's set him free. That was his modus operandi. He left all his victims alive. However, that night, something had changed. When he was dressing himself, he started hearing the police sirens in the distance. He thought the sirens were coming for him, so he told Jacob to turn around. He took the gun and then he shot him. The worst thing that happened in that moment was that the gunshot didn't get to Jacob. Let's say that he missed, so imagine what that boy should have felt in that moment. Then he shot him a second time almost immediately, and Jacob fell to the floor lifeless. The man got closer to verify that the kid was dead indeed, and then went back to his home in Painesville without the boy. He got back a couple of hours later with some tools and things to be able to take the boy's body away and bury it somewhere else. He said he buried him around 100 yards away from where he had shot him in the first place. And he managed to hide him in an area where he excavated and hid the body, where there were some low bushes and things that prevented the body from being seen. Obviously, he buried him with everything and his clothes, and from that moment on, he didn't know anything about that again. Let's say that he didn't care. A year passed, and for some reason, the man went back to the area in which he had buried Jacob's body, and he realized that the body was starting to be visible. I mean, it was like the dirt was being removed for some reason and the body started to surface, especially his red jacket. As he obviously wasn't going to allow for someone to find him, he decided to dig him up. He obviously was decomposed, only bones remained, so he dug everything up, packed it in a bag and went to another place with more time, buried the body and left it there forever. When 27 years had passed after all this, it was 2016 and he confessed to his crime. That's when, let's say that he receives a court order from the judge to tell them where the remains are. Obviously, he confesses to everything, tells them, and then the police goes and finds Jacob's remains indeed. There was some relief for the family, however, obviously it was a supremely painful experience because imagine what it was to them that the man got a reduced sentence just for confessing. Sadly, after the trial, he only gets sentenced to 20 years, which is a very low sentence and it's the maximum amount of years they could give a person that committed a crime of possession of minors' files. I find this very sad because he never paid for the other crimes he committed against more children with Jared and obviously for Jacob's death, which was a homicide. There were also a lot of abuses and violations to the law, which I find very sad. Sadly, the family was hoping to find Jacob alive. They celebrated his birthday every year, hoping he'll come back and blow the candles off his cake. And here obviously I blame the police a lot because there were so many mistakes they made during the investigation. They weren't able to identify the rough boys that so many kids mentioned regarding this man when it was clear it was him. On the other hand, they never properly investigated the Painesville crimes against kids between 1986 and 1988, in which surely Jacob was involved. They focused on investigating every state except the testimonies hundreds of people were given in the same city of these events. The kidnapper sketches were very alike to Heinrich, and they never paid attention to that either. There were also some traces of DNA in some things from Heinrich victims, and they didn't pay attention to that either. So for me, this was a terrible investigation. It was done very poorly, and the ones who solved this case were actually Jared and Joy, the victim from 9 months before, and the journalist. Doing all this journalistic process, identifying things from the victims and everything, only they were able to get to this man's DNA and to identify that he was the possible culprit. So for me, it was a terrible investigation. It didn't make any sense that the police did a very bad job during the whole process and with the sentence. This man can get out of jail at any point and nothing's going to happen. Nothing different is going to happen. I'm sure that the man will go back to doing what he did before because he's a psychopath and that's it. More things are going to happen if he does get out because he was already old, but probably he will get out. After all this, Jacob's family created the Jacob Wetterling Foundation, which is a foundation for the protection of the kids. Thanks to them, a law was approved known as the Jacob Wetterling Law, which is for the registration of offenders regarding crimes and violence against kids, or that didn't exist before. It was like someone denounced something and the offender wasn't registered. It has been modified several times, but it's still an active law. I found this case incredible and I wanted to tell you about it for the nature of the events, and I want you to tell me what you think. What do you think the right thing was? But I feel that however you look at it, actually there wasn't absolutely anything right in this case. Oh, and the thing I wanted to link before was, imagine how the father feels when he thinks that because of him, his son is dead. Because in the end, it was him who decided that they could go and have them permission to do so. Poor man, I hope he doesn't feel like this, but it must be very difficult to see your son going and knowing he died the same night that he was kidnapped. They thought and hoped he was still alive for 27 years. But anyway, I leave this case here. You know that if you like it, don't forget to leave a like, a thumbs up, comment what you think, and if you connected with the story, what did you feel? Follow me on all my social media. You know I have a billion social media accounts. Subscribe to this channel and activate the notification bell so it lets you know when I upload a new video. Thank you so much for watching me. Don't forget to follow your dreams and I'll see you on the next one. Bye!